Hi, everyone, and welcome to WorldView. I'm Petrus, joined by Donald and our guest. WorldView is a podcast where we explore everyone's perspective on all things that can broaden our worldview. Today, we're talking with David Dnistran. He's a business consultant with over 30 years of working experience at multinational corporations. His primary focus has always been on business development internationally, with an emphasis on market expansion in business related to data centers and construction. He speaks a multitude of languages, some more conversational than professional, but definitely Mandarin Chinese as well as English, and has worked in countries like Hong Kong, Singapore, and more, with businesses, big name businesses you'll recognize, such as Hewlett Packard and Schneider Electric. David, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much for having me today.
Yeah, so I mean, I've given you the professional lowdown on exactly what you do, but learning a bit more about you personally, I saw that you went to the University of Minnesota. Why Minnesota specifically?
Actually, at the time, the University of Minnesota had one of the best architectural design programs in the United States, and I wanted to be an architect. And so I applied to actually 5 different schools and got accepted, but I had an architect when I was in high school in the city where I grew up and said, David, if you can go to the University of Minnesota, it's one of the top schools.
Oh, yeah?
It's in terms of design level, it was on par with Harvard at the time.
Okay, fantastic. And you mentioned some more of your personal interests in Minnesota as well. I have a feeling it has something to do with some hunting?
Actually, yeah, in my younger years, I was an avid duck hunter and deer hunter and pheasant hunter. And so I knew in the Midwest, where Minnesota is located, Midwestern part of the US, right, they have tremendous hunting and it's a flyway for when the geese and the ducks migrate from Canada down south in the wintertime. When they go through in the fall, it's just a tremendous area to hunt. So I thought, you know what? It's a great place to go to school. It's a great place to hunt as well.
Man, that sounds amazing. It says educational and recreational. We actually have hunting is also pretty big and quite a lot of fun here in South Africa as well. I hope you've had the opportunity to come by here, I'm assuming.
Well, I've been to South Africa a number of times. I've not had an opportunity to hunt, but one of my very, very good friends who lives in Stellenbosch actually is a big game hunter, and he's just wanting me to come and go with him at some point. So right now we are planning to come back to South Africa in January and be there for a while. And so maybe I'll get a chance to do some hunting in South Africa during.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. Yeah, as soon as the big virus has run its course, of course. So coming back to the business thing, you said you studied to do architecture, but now you're a business consultant. How exactly does that journey go? And what exactly was the module that you studied, your major in Minnesota?
Well, my major was architecture. So I became an architect. After you graduate, you've got to work a minimum of 3 years, and then there's a series of exams that you take to get licensed. I got licensed and became an architect. But my goal, or maybe not my goal, but the way it worked out, I did not work as an architect. Design was not my strong suit. My strong suit was construction and project management. So I found myself working generally for either real estate developers or contractors, and in between representing them with the architects. Architects generally don't have a lot of on-site experience in construction. My dad was a builder, and so I tried to bridge that gap and was able to tell the architects, hey, listen, I'm an architect, let's figure this thing out. Because architects have a tendency to talk down to contractors. They think contractors are the dumb guys.
Okay.
And so I tried to level that playing field, and it worked out well. I had a great career. I was a project man. I started out as a project manager. I worked for the largest real estate developers in Minneapolis for 11 years. And by the time that I finished with them, I was running all of their real estate development and construction. So
nice. That's interesting. I feel like it's so applicable. You have over 30 years of work experience, but in today, at least, in the process that Donald and I are currently in, trying to find jobs and stuff like that, you see them really enjoying these people that are qualified in terms of hybrid things, the fact you can do multiple things, or that you're some sort of communication between two groups that need the communication to be able to work effectively. So it's amazing to hear this has been a long time coming.
Yeah, no, and again, I the guys that I worked for were guys that just threw me into the pool and said, you know, you're going to learn how to swim. And again, the boss that I had at the time, right out of college, was a guy that said, hey, there's nothing you can really screw up and do that bad, and I'm just going to put you in it because he said if I'm with you, nobody's going to respect you or listen to you. So you go out and do it. If you got a problem, come back and see me, and I'll help you out, figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, you have to stand on your own 2 feet, definitely. But I mean, you said throwing yourself into a pool, but going to Asia, working there in some of the big, the corporate hubs of the world, like Hong Kong. What was that experience like, and why specifically did you go to Asia? Was that your final destination, or how does that work?
Well, actually, I went. The first trip to Asia was just to go visit a missionary friend and who lived in Thailand in 1980, and we spent about 6 weeks with he and his wife, and it was just a life change. Wow, I'd never been really outside of the U.S., and it was like, wow, this is a completely a different culture and a different world for me, and it appealed to me. And so then in '85, my wife and I decided to do a 6-month missions trip in Hong Kong, where we had opportunities to go into China and into Japan. And I thought, the worst case scenario is if we love it. I mean, the best case is if we love it, we can stay or go back. The worst case is if it's only 6 months and, we can come back home. We did it for 6 months. We really found it to be something that we really loved. So I came back, and as a result of me going over to Asia for those 6 months, that's when I was working for those developers. They came over to Asia to visit me and look for business, and they found some business, and they asked me if I'd be willing to go to Japan and run we were doing a design build on a new restaurant concept in Tokyo. And so I relocated to Tokyo for a short while and oversaw the design and the construction.
So you actually took the initiative. I mean, your contractors, your developers that you worked with, they followed you going to Asia. That's taking some initiative, taking the torch and having them follow you. That's amazing. And having
These,
some.
these were two good guys. They're about 10 years older than I am, and I've still got good relationships with them. And here
Yeah.
we are for 40 plus years later. But these guys were street fighters. They fought for every dollar that they could find, and they just liked doing things that were different. And they said, they believed in their mind that there wasn't anything they couldn't do if they put their mind to it. So they said, hey, let's go to Asia and represent ourselves they had a good track record in Minneapolis. And so they said, let's go do something in another.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. I mean, that's also one thing I have to say from our perspective from South Africa, the spirit of exploration and that feeling that there's nothing that you can't do is something that we quite respect, especially in our Afrikaans culture. We quite respect a lot about American culture as well, and in business specifically, which is obviously your forte. And having compared it with that spirit and you guys coming in with that type of mentality, which of the Asian countries that you were able to visit among I think it was Hong Kong, Singapore, you mentioned Thailand right now, which of them really has that different of a culture, but which of them really do it well as well, like succeed in the way that they do business?
Well, in my opinion, Singapore is got the greatest testimony. I mean, they were just they broke off from Malaysia. I don't remember the year. I believe it was in the 1960s. And a guy by the name of Lee Kuan Yew, who's considered to be the father of Singapore, just ran it in a tough dictator.
Right.
As a dictator, let me say it that way. But he was not a dictator. He was really a guy that loved to build up the economy and grow it in a democratic type state. And he turned it into just a city that worked. And to go to Singapore today, it's one of the most modern cities in the world, the most highly educated people in the world, the very low on crime. They have zero debt, and it's a city that just works. Everything works. Or the traffic, the it's just an amazing little testimony. Now you can say, well, it's only a country of, I don't even know, about 7 million people. But you say, well, anybody can make that work, but it's not true. This thing is one of the largest shipping ports in the world.
Yeah.
Everything in that part of the world, it's a hub for just going into China and Asia and the rest of that part of the world. It's just an amazing place.
And the history is fascinating. I can't exactly quite remember. I'll have to double check this. But as far as I know, it's actually during the creation of Singapore as an independent state, it's more so that Malaysia didn't really want them than them necessarily working for the freedom. But I'm not actually sure about that. I'll have to double check it. But, you have the scenario where you have a really small state with extremely high population density in a very small area. It's quite similar actually to Hong Kong. Also have, quite an interesting history, being, I think, an independent state of the UK. Once the lease ended, of course, I think it was 1990s, they got given over to China. Don't they exactly have a similar story where they also grew exponentially over time? What's the benefits of that? Or from a business perspective, why do you think that happened?
Well, but the other thing is that, oftentimes we talk about racism and we just think about whites and blacks, but we don't realize how much racism there is in Asia. And between different Chinese, between the mainland Chinese and the Taiwanese, between the Hong Kong Chinese and the mainland Chinese, between the Singaporeans who are Chinese and the Malaysians. And so, Lee Kuan Yew is a Chinese guy. Malaysia is run by Malay people. And so when he broke off, it was just an interesting dynamic to look at and see how that really works. But Singapore is a melting pot, a multicultural country, but it's really, the main languages are English and Chinese. And so it's more of a Chinese nation than a Malay nation.
Okay, right. And then, similarly, Hong Kong is also Chinese and English as their main languages, having they were a British independent state, as far as I remember.
But Hong Kong, I lived in Hong Kong on a couple of occasions. I lived in Singapore as well. But Hong Kong had in 1997, they had China had basically a lease with the British where it went back to China in 1997. I was actually there at the handover
at the time,
and they agreed to give Hong Kong a 50-year lease that would go to 2047, where it would allow its independence and its freedom of the press and it's laissez-faire type attitude to be able to continue to conduct business. And as I think you're aware, in the last 2 years, China has cracked down on the protests in Hong Kong, and they have really come down hard on the freedom of the press. And in the last 6 months, they've just stepped in and said, hey, we're not going to wait till 2047. We're taking over Hong Kong now. And it's really, really a sad thing to do.
It's a very, very, very serious situation. And I think, we've seen protests, especially in the last time, in a couple of months, but, these protests in Hong Kong have been going on for, I think it's almost 2 years now, or is it going 3 years? But they're persistent. It's not, a flare of, them being inspired for a short amount of time and protesting. They're continuing to fight for their freedom to this day.
Yeah, and the Hong Kong people are very, very hardworking, entrepreneurial people that just, their God is money. It's not about, they don't want to be under communist control. They just want to continue to grow and make money and do what they do and carry on with business. And for China to come in there and kind of squelch, they've had freedom of the press. They've had the whole world viewed Hong Kong as a gem where companies could come in and set up shop and do business there. Well, now it's no longer quote unquote Hong Kong. Now it's China, and it's going to be a different flavor and a different way of carrying on things there.
Don't you think that specific difference, the freedom of press, the ability for a lot of the rest of the world's, economic, almost want to say economic powers to come in and have access to this Asian area of economic trade. Don't you think China stifling that will actually then, encourage these companies to move out, or is the money just too lucrative and China will prioritize economic growth above all? But, aren't they damaging the economic potential of Hong Kong specifically by doing this?
Yeah, I don't think China looks at it that way. I think China looks at, they would like to, you know, Hong Kong is theirs and they want it to be China. I mean, they feel that Taiwan is theirs. And, really the only thing right now that stands between China taking over Taiwan is the United States and Donald Trump. And
Right,
so,
right.
um, you know, China, if they could and would, they would take over more and more of different aspects and parts of Asia if they could. So, Hong Kong was legally theirs in another what is it, 26 years or something, whatever the debt, or 27 years from now, and 47. But they just said, hey, it's ours. What are you going to do about it? And they just kind of up to the world to say, hey, you can't
Yeah.
stop us from doing this. Now, if they were to go after Taiwan like that, that would be another story. But Hong
Right.
Kong, I mean, it started several years ago with just trying to stop the protests and trying to stop the press, and then kicking out some of the people and arresting some of the people who were reporters that were reporting, in a Western way against the communistic ways. So it's just,
Yeah, I mean, they have some very, very, very different worldviews between China and the way that Hong Kongers have been, raised, and what they value, the same freedom of speech, and to be able to protest against their form of government is almost a monotype of identity for cities like Hong Kong and the Western sphere. But you said that Taiwan will be a different beast if China would try to incorporate them as well. What exactly do you mean by that?
well, meaning that Hong Kong legally was going to come back to China, if they waited. I mean,
Right.
right now it was part of China, but it didn't get fully released until 2047. Taiwan is not that case. Taiwan broke off from China back in the late 1940s. Chiang Kai-shek went to Taiwan. And, if you talk to the Taiwan people, they believe that they are the true China.
Yeah.
If you talk to China, they believe that Beijing is the true capital city of China. But the
Right.
Taiwan people won't call Beijing Beijing. They call it Peking, because it's just all these little innuendos and who's right. And so Taiwan's sort of like a flea on a dog, where they couldn't stand up to China, but they are standing up, and they've got the backing of the US and really the rest of the world. So it's
Right.
just an interesting scenario politically.
Oh, and we're seeing like a lot of this actually affects us as well. There's so much happening now in what we would call the eastern sector of the world that's affecting more than just the relations between China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, but also economically, we've seen more influence from China in, especially in, very westernized or Western allied countries like Australia, for example. And even here in South Africa, we've seen a big investment from loans from China as well. What exactly do you see is the biggest challenges or problems with this? And don't you think there's a possibility in which we could actually solve this diplomatically? Or do you think there's almost has to be, the power has to be equal for us to actually be able to negotiate with the Chinese government at this time?
I don't think the Chinese have any interest in negotiating. I think their style around the world, and I think you see it on the African continent, is to go into countries to provide a means of infrastructure at no charge or very little charge, and then in a result for that, the countries are indebted to them, whether it's for power, whether it's for roads, whether it's for whatever the case may be. I'll give you one example. I worked for Schneider Electric, and we were building data centers around the world. And there was an opportunity to bid on a data center in an African country, and we wanted the job. And so we went at it very, very competitively. And data centers are expensive projects. I mean, they could be in the terms of more than several $100 million US. And so we went at it very, very competitively to try to get the job. We were bidding against a Chinese company, Huawei.
Oh, yeah.
Huawei is a big name that is actually a branch of the Chinese government. And they said to this country, we'll give you the data center for free. In turn, then you allow us to, take the resources and provide the electricity and provide the things that you need. And so it's a problem. I'm working with some people right now in Zambia. I'm working with a friend who provides sovereign debt for nations. And right now in Zambia, China's got them handcuffed and said, hey, we've given you loans and money, and you owe us, and we're not going to release these debts unless you pay us back.
Yeah,
so
I mean, they
it's just
don't pay with money. They pay with almost want to say leveraging power. I understand your perspective. Do you think this attitude?
they're going in and raping the nations. And when I say from the resources, whether that's gold or whether that's diamonds or whether that's oil or whatever the case may be in the ground, they're just going in there. And sure, they're providing an infrastructure with roads and electricity and water, but they're just taking everything else out of those countries.
Do you think this is? Do you think this attitude of China, as you're describing it, is solely due to their current leader, the controversial figure? And if you think they got rid of him, do you think the people's perspective is different, or has it been too long, the propaganda, the perspective of the Chinese people, that it's now their identity? Is it the CPP specifically, the Chinese Communist Party, CCP specifically, or is it China as a whole that has this attitude? I mean, you've been there.
I mean, these are just my opinions. Okay, I am not. I mean, I have strong opinions. Here's a good story, a way to put it in perspective. When I was living in Hong Kong, I was serving on a board of the American Chamber of Commerce, where we would help U.S. companies that were considering moving to Hong Kong, and people this was pre-1997, before Hong Kong was given back to China. So you had on our board, we had different Americans, and you had the Americans that were literally born and raised in Hong Kong. There were guys like me who had been living and working in Hong Kong for a number of years. And then you had the people that just came in and moved into Hong Kong, let's say in the last year or two. So the question that would get asked to everyone is, hey, what's going to happen to Hong Kong after 1997?
Right.
Well, the guy that had been there for 1 year or less, he knew exactly what was going to happen. And he would say, this is what's going to happen. Somebody like me who'd been there for several years said, well, I'm not sure, it could go this way or it could go this way. And the person that was born and raised in Hong Kong said, we don't have a clue because you have no idea what China's going to do. So it's just a funny way of thinking. So when you're asking me my opinions now, I have opinions, but the bottom line is we really don't know what China's really going to do. Is Xi, the current leader of China, a problem? He is, especially now that he put in the law that he can remain as the premier of China forever.
Yeah.
But the Communist Party runs China with an iron fist, and they're really not that big in terms of numbers. I mean, there's a lot of wealthy, all of the power is in that Communist Party. But the fact of the matter is that the normal Chinese who's interested in making money or having a business or having a house, providing for their kids, they're not interested in the communism. So they're very capitalistic. So the fact that China maintains control, if the communist government is ever overthrown, then obviously China would change. And in my opinion, one of the biggest threats to communism in China is Christianity. The underground church in China, because they're so, it's like taking a beach ball and trying to push it under the water. I mean, you push it and it wants to pop up. You push it, it wants to pop up. That's how I would view the Christian church in China. The communists are trying to push them down, but the church is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And one day, I believe that communism is gonna topple. But when that'll be, I have no idea.
Right. Yeah. No, it's much more difficult to predict these things exactly, but the signs are possibly there. It's actually fantastic that you mentioned specifically the Christian church in China, as we've seen the Chinese government crack down on other religious groups with the same iron fist that you've mentioned before, specifically the Uyghur Muslim detention centers in the country. What exactly do you think about that in terms of, what is that getting them? Is that to consolidate their power? Is it because their power is perhaps not as strong as it perceives that they have to do this to certain groups like the Muslims?
Well, the Uyghurs, they're in Western China. They're in the Western provinces. And that's where, China borders other nations there in that part of Asia. And that's a Muslim area. And China does not want to lose any control. So they've gone in and torn down all the temples, all the historic buildings, everything that has to do with the Muslim religion, Islam. They've torn it down, and they're putting the Uyghur people in prisons, and it's truly a form of tyranny that's really, really horrible.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And I mean, we've seen this type of interaction. They've become more aggressive in the Western side, especially with the Muslims, but then they've also had some altercations with, I think it was Indian troops in a sector there. It was the westernmost border with India. They were all combined with the rest of the countries. We've seen a lot of action there. It's far, far away from their main population groups, but you think that perhaps, some more, especially now that India will be considered superpower with their population and their economic power. Do you think there'll be more conflict there between India and China, perhaps keeping them in check, than necessarily the US, which you've mentioned before, as a checking power for China?
Yeah, I don't think so. I just think that China is going to maintain a strong military presence just to keep the control of their border. I don't know that they're going to go after India even though as other nations, but they don't want other nations influencing China coming in and whether it's with their religion or
right. I see. You've mentioned, multiple times that U.S. is definitely, especially militarily with their naval presence around Taiwan, is a great controlling power and a limiting power, allowing Taiwan to maintain its independence. But we've seen with the recent election, that might be something that might be threatened, specifically because this was a strong perspective of Donald Trump. And now there's a possibility that he might not be president in the next 4 years. Do you see that changing something, or what exactly was your opinions on the recent election?
Oh, yeah. I think that if Trump is not president for the next 4 years, then that's going to be I think that Taiwan will be in jeopardy in terms of their potential takeover from China, or the influence that China would have, where I think it would be right now there's a sort of a wall that the U.S. is putting up and saying, China, you can't mess around. And I think that wall would come down, and not immediately, but over time, China would have a means that they don't have right now to influence Taiwan.
Yeah, I mean, one of the major things, especially that we're actually, noticing from South Africa, and obviously affecting South Africa, is the trade war between the US and China and the embargoes. You mentioned Huawei as a company that you guys competed against in the past. We actually at our university here in Stellenbosch have Huawei routers, or our network systems in the university was installed by Huawei as one of the contractors that won the bid. But due to the trade war and the sanctions that are against Huawei products, university is actually being pressured to remove them and replace them with any other service provider that's not directly linked with the Chinese Communist Party. So in that case, we see this affecting other countries as well. Have you noticed this in other places, or?
Well, I mean, just picking on Huawei, when I was working for the French company, the guy that I worked for was a very, very sharp man, very, very intelligent man. He said, David, watch out, mark my words, Huawei is going to go in and try to influence nations and businesses in any way they can. Anything goes with Huawei. No matter what they have to do, they can do it. They'll do it. Legal or illegal, they'll go do it. And Huawei came into the US and they've been banned because of paying bribes and things. And so, but just seeing what they did with that one data center in an African country to say, hey, you know what? Our bid is $100 million US. Their bid is free. Hey, it doesn't take much to think, who are we going to go with here? Well,
But how do you effectively, from a business perspective, as you've done consulting in multiple countries, from a business perspective, how exactly do you combat this effectively? Because I mean, you have a situation, and especially in South Africa and other African countries, where they don't have the financials to necessarily, build this infrastructure and leapfrog their technology ahead to where they can be competitive on the world scale. And here comes someone and says, "Hey, we'll do it for free." That has to be too, almost attractive of an offer. It's like, how do you combat that type of buying power almost? From a business
It's tough,
perspective.
especially when it's government to government. If I'm talking about a private company and we're bidding with a private company and we're working with them, that's one thing. But when the China comes in and says to that government that's, if it's an African country building a data center, it's probably a company that's related to the government in some way or form, and they're saying, "Hey, we will help your country out. We'll help your nation out." And so that's tough. I don't know. That's a real tough one. This friend of mine that I'm working with now that's providing the sovereign debt, it's a huge problem in Africa. It's not a problem in other nations in South America where he's working and in the Middle East, but Africa right now is just handcuffed with the financial ties that they've got with China, where they needed the money and now China is holding them hostage. So I don't know how that's going to end up or how that's going to play out.
Yeah, no, I don't either. It's a debate that's worth having, and a view that definitely should be shared. I'm just always, in the back of my mind, it's like, like you said, they're coming in, they're offering this stuff for free, but nothing's for free. I mean, you have to work, everything costs something. So how exactly is China paying for this? I mean, they're buying a lot of countries by offering these services for free, but there should be a cost to this. And their economic growth, it's been slowing in the past few years, but it's still growing. So how are they able to grow economically and still, offer these services or major things for free?
Yeah, again, kind of like the media, we really don't know what's going on in China. It's a bubble. I'll give you a couple of examples. In 2008, when the Olympics were in Beijing, I was there. I was living there, and Beijing wanted to put a face to the world that we're this beautiful city. And Beijing is a very, very, very polluted city. So what they did months before the Olympics were to start, they took your license plates on your vehicles. If you had an odd number ending, you could only drive on odd days. If you had an even number ending, you could only drive on even days. So for 3 months prior to that, they cut down half of the traffic in Beijing.
Right.
Number two, they took control of all the factories within 50 kilometers of Beijing and shut them down completely. Said, no more business because we don't want pollution going into the air.
Yeah.
Number three, they shot something into the atmosphere so it wouldn't rain, so they would have perfect weather. And I will tell you, I was living there. It didn't rain for 6 months after the election. Not a single day of rain. They messed around with the atmosphere. So they tried to put on the TVs of the world that Beijing is this clean city with blue skies and no traffic. And for all the tourists that are going to come and take part in the Olympics, wow, it's a beautiful city. Look at traffic is good there. I mean, so all these things were done ahead of time. So it's a bubble. It's fake. It's not real.
But then, I mean, they have to orchestrate the most impressive routes in the world. Because I mean, if you shut down all of the factories in 50-kilometer radius around Beijing, that's going to be economically devastating. I mean, I don't know how some business almost exist. You have to bail them out with government funds. So that has to cost something. It's just my economic sense just goes, where does this money come from? How exactly do they fund this?
Yeah, it's just an economic bubble. And, the guys at the top are all about protecting themselves in their position. And, I read a poll where they asked 2,000 wealthiest Chinese one question: if you could have anything, what would you like? And overwhelmingly, the answer was to leave China.
Really?
And it was an amazing answer But the problem is, what you don't understand about that answer is that the communists have handcuffs on you, and you're wealthy because you're a communist. It's one man helping the other, and you can't leave. They'll devastate and cripple you if you say, well, if you're a powerful communist and you become a Christian, you're gone. Your kids can't go to school anymore. You can't have access to all the things that you've got access to. So even and all the monies that you've got is tied in to the party. So these people can't leave. They're handcuffed. And to say that we'd like to leave China is amazing testimony about China, really what's going on there.
I mean, I can imagine that being quite the, very dangerous answer to give for them. So it'd be interesting to see, how those people tracking their progress, how their lives have been affected by engaging this way. I mean, we know of quite a few people from both South Korea, Japan, and China, all three countries that have come to South Africa here to study. The universities in China are extremely overpopulated, and they generally send the people overseas, especially to countries like Australia. And then the kids that come along with them and come to South African schools and places like those, they don't really want to go back because it's kind of nice. It's not quite as crowded, it's the friends are different, but it's interesting to see them then coming outside of that bubble and experiencing a different type of worldview, and then wanting to stay here. It begs the question that, there's some other bubbles that we've seen in history economically and socially. Do you think perhaps bringing it back to the United States, that the current election is almost also a bit of a bubble? It's like, Trump's election recently passed, and we might see him as the president for the next 4 years or may not. But, that again might be a bubble that might be bursted. He might not be president, but Biden will also not be president. How exactly do you see the US changing that regard? And the polarization of the country is something that, from an outside perspective, we're actually quite concerned about.
Yeah, I mean, I have a strong opinion on that, and again, it's just my opinion. I believe that Trump will serve for another 4 years as president. I think the way it was put to me recently, and I like this example that, and you probably in Africa can relate to this, or South Africa, where if you're trying to kill an alligator, and you've got it wrapped in let's just say a rope and that thing knows it's going to die or going to get taken. It's going to do everything it possibly can do to get out of it. I mean, anything goes. That thing it's just going to, that roll and everything it does just to get set free.
Right.
The state in the US is that alligator right now. Trump has them on the verge of putting them on the ropes in terms of getting them exposed. Right now, Biden is their hope to say, hey, we're going to get rid of Trump. They've been trying to get rid of Trump since the day after he got elected in 2016. And so Trump is going to is on the verge of exposing a lot of things. There are things going on with the Department of Justice and with, there's an attorney, John Durham, who's working on things, and Trump didn't want these things exposed before the election because it would have looked like it was political. But I believe that here in this next month, we're going to see a lot of this stuff come out. The problem is the media is anti-Trump. I don't care where you go in the world. It's really, really an anti-Trump media, and really what Trump is doing and what he's done for our country is not being reported. Melania, his wife, is a beautiful woman. She has not been on a single cover of a magazine anywhere in the world in 4 years. Obama's wife, Michelle, was on every magazine and newspaper all the time. So it's just a media control thing that's really anti-Trump.
So I mean, the media, like you said, has a lot of power. I mean, they have a lot of polarizing power almost, they're setting up the two groups to against each other. And from our perspective outside, this is actually extremely dangerous, with Trump, facing some of the discrepancies in state that you've mentioned. I just want to find out, who exactly are the people that are trying to fight back to him? We're trying to understand what are the polarizing forces here against each other that can be so damaging to the United States. Um, do you know if if Trump is the one side of the spectrum that's kind of like pushing against them, and the other side trying to push against each other? Who is the other side exactly? You say Trump is their hope?
Well, yeah, I think that what he's pushing against is a Marxist socialist state where the government just takes more and more and more control. I just read last night, and I didn't read much of it, but in the state of Pennsylvania last night, they want to pass a law where you have to wear a mask inside of your house, inside of the house.
With no other people around.
I mean, come on. I mean, the control that they're trying to issue, they're talking about things where if you don't get the vaccine, then you can't fly on an airplane. You can't go into certain places. You can't travel. You can't do that. I mean, it's just all about control. And it's just been historically, it's just been happening slowly over time. And I believe, people look at it, I suppose, as conspiracy theories, but if you look at the history of really what's going on, there's a well-executed plan in place, and Trump's been somebody who stood in the way. I mean, if Hillary Clinton would have gotten elected, things would have just continued as they were, and I can't imagine where we would be today.
Right. You mentioned COVID, which is something I specifically wanted to talk about simply because it is, it's been a very strong standing point, especially of this election in the past time. You also mentioned that before we started the podcast, you mentioned some tests that you've witnessed, and the false positive rates they've had is in some cases quite shocking. We've had popular figures like Elon Musk casting doubt on the results of the tests. And my question is just that there's definitely people that's gone to hospital for COVID-19, but how exactly can we scope the impact, the economic and the business destruction that this pandemic would cause, and also the regulations that a lot of states like Pennsylvania are trying to pass? How exactly do you gauge that effectively without effective tests? Like what solution would you perhaps recommend from a business standpoint would be both protecting people, from health issues, but also on the other hand, actually gets a realistic view on how bad this pandemic is?
Again, my opinions, but the pandemic is real. I'm not going to deny that. In terms of, there is a virus, there is a COVID-19. But is it as bad as everyone has said? Do masks really work and help? I mean, for every media report that says this is horrible and you're going to die, there are doctors that aren't being reported that are saying this is a bunch of malarkey. And this whole thing was planned. And again, part of the deep state for control. How do you take control of a country? I feel it was a test run, and I think it went way better than they ever imagined. And people are like sheep. They just submitted and said, oh my gosh, we can't send our kids to school. I can't get out. I better do this. I better do that. And it's like, wow. I mean, there are doctors out there that are saying that this virus is no worse than any other virus that we've had historically. And if you want to fight against it, you've got to go out there and get it, meaning you probably won't even know that you've got the symptoms, and then your body just has natural antibodies that will fight it. Okay. I take vitamin C and some other things every day. I've been hanging and working and going places where you're not supposed to go and do all the normal things. It hasn't stopped me from being normal. And yet I've got friends and family members that just think that this is, I'm wrong for living the way I'm living. So it's just, I believe, a means of control. It's just, I think it was a test where they said, let's see how well this goes. And wow, it's just, went way better than I think they ever imagined.
Yeah, I mean, fear is an incredibly powerful force, and definitely it can be leveraged in this way. to devastating effects. My question is just how exactly do you fight that? I mean, if you want to get facts and you want to get data out there, the tests and different types of things, what exactly do you think would be a method that would respect people's freedom, allow them to continue doing and living the way that they live, but also, gauge exactly the effectiveness of this pandemic? How do you fight the fear? Basically, that's what I'm trying to ask.
Well, again, these are my opinions, and I don't know this, as these are just my hunch or my feeling. But Biden has come out, this is factual. Biden has come out and said if he's president on day one, he's going to mandate that all masks have to be worn everywhere and that everybody has to get a vaccine. And this vaccine scares me in terms of what I've read and heard from truly the top in the world are saying, we don't want this vaccine. I believe that once things get settled with Trump in this election, if he is reinstated as president for the next 4 years, I think the whole tune is going to change, and everything about this virus is going to come out and say that, and the truth will be exposed. Right now, if he said that, everybody would say that he's a nutcase, because the media and the mainstream media and the medical people behind them are saying, no, this is going to, Biden said it in the debates. There's going to be 200,000 more deaths in the United States if you don't wear masks between his debate last month and the end of the year. Come on.
So, I mean, from a legal standpoint, this is extremely important statement to analyze from Biden, because there has been the argument has been made that this is actually, in fact, unconstitutional to force this type of restriction of freedom and medication on the people. The Trump judges, or the judges that Trump appointed in the Constitutional Court, weren't they necessarily be able to strike this down because of, this is an official statement. If he tries to enforce it, it'll be equally as bad. So from a legal standpoint, do you think that, does Trump have, or the judges, do they have the ability to strike down this type of sentiment, even if Trump is not elected? And also, do you think that the Trump legal team has the basis to win this election and be able to enforce this? Or how exactly do you feel like the election is currently going?
Well, I feel the Trump legal team has it's going to be a big fight. It's not going to be easy, but I think that Trump has I think that he can win the election. I think that, I saw online last night where next Thursday, a week from today, is our Thanksgiving holiday in the United States. It's a major holiday. One of the politicians came out last night, a Democrat, and said, we don't think that families should get together next Thursday because they will spread COVID. I mean, you're telling me that I can't meet with my kids or my parents because I'm going to spread COVID. And that's not about control? Come on.
Yeah, it's restricting the freedom and also the core identity that we, at least from a perspective from South Africa, have about the American people, that freedom is quite important. And I can definitely see people fighting for that. It's just very important, or the question that I think a lot of international people's minds is that we're actually quite afraid of this divide that is causing and the fear mongering that's being used through COVID to be able to rather not bridge the gap, the opposite thereof. It's trying to expand this divide. And the question is how exactly do you go forward towards bridging this gap? That people can understand, both sides need to be listened to, freedom needs to be respected, but also, the threat needs to be assessed from COVID's perspective and the actions that are taking towards it. So this has been incredibly interesting, but, from perspective also an interesting thing I noticed when you said about the Olympics in Beijing, them trying to clear the air and portray this as a beautiful city. We've seen some of the photos, especially in the beginning of the lockdown periods in April during the COVID virus's peak almost. Here in South Africa, we've seen pictures from around the world where suddenly everybody having to stay at home and factories being shut down has had a massive positive effect on the, on the climate, at least in the way that things look, smog and stuff like that. We've seen actions like those being very positive, but then obviously, as people start working again, it starts looking worse. How exactly do you see other crises, like, for example, the Paris Climate Accord convention, the one that Trump withdrew from? How do you see crises like those also being played between both sides in either fear-mongering or resolving the problems like climate, the smog in the air and the pollution and so on and so forth?
I'm probably not qualified to, I mean, I've got opinions, but I'm not qualified to really address that.
Mm.
I'll throw something out here that's radical, and you could say it's a conspiracy theory, but I have a very close friend who is a close personal friend of a very senior person in the FBI. And so I don't know this guy personally, but I'm close friends with somebody who it's one of their best friends.
Right.
And they told me last week that they had lunch with this guy, this FBI guy. And he said that the actual real reason for developing COVID in China was to overtake Taiwan. It was not to go worldwide. They were going to infect Taiwan with the virus, and everything got screwed up, and it didn't happen, and it got out. But the original reason for the virus was for China to take over Taiwan.
Right.
Now, that's all that I'll say. That's all that this guy said. He and take it for what it's worth. But you know, so back to your questions on China, what they're trying to do, and will they use any means possible to do what they've got to do? I believe they will. Is this virus real, or has it really been weaponized to cause problems? It has. In the United States and countries like South Africa, up until 2 weeks or last week or 2 weeks ago, I, as an American, couldn't fly into South Africa. Now they just opened their borders. So these things, and if you watch news reports, it's interesting. The same words are used by newscasters in virtually every country in the world. Thing is being fed from the top down to say, this is what we want you to report.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's almost like in the way you describe it, it's almost like a weapon in terms of controlling and fear mongering. We've seen other weapons beside the virus, of course, being quite effective, such as social media, which is a research topic of mine at the university. Also furthering, certain, it's almost like an amplifying base, for stuff like, climate change and the coronavirus. Social media has been used to share information. Do you think that they don't necessarily just share information between people, but they actually increase this divide between the people in terms of the different opinions, furthering fear-mongering and stuff like that? What's your perspective on that?
I mean, there was a whistleblower that came out about Facebook. One of the senators questioned the high-tech guys yesterday. There was Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook, and then
yes,
who's the guy at Twitter? Jack Dorsey.
Yeah.
And these guys went before Congress yesterday, and it was black and white on the news last night that I was watching online, where the senator said, listen, Mr. Zuckerberg, I understand there is this program, I think it was called Centra, that said you can do this and this and this and this within your company, and Facebook is used to get all this information, and even people that aren't on Facebook, it's got the ability to collect information. And then you pass it on to Google. Can you tell me about that? And Zuckerberg looked and said, well, I'm not familiar with that. And just did not. And then it came out later that one of the Facebook guys came out and said, he's lying through his teeth. This is absolutely true software that we're using. So again, it's just so interesting to me that these guys come before Congress, they get grilled, and then nothing changes. Nothing happens.
Yeah.
Just continue on with business as normal. Do you remember when Jack Dorsey from Twitter a few weeks ago, when the thing came out, maybe you didn't even see it in South Africa, but the thing came out about Hunter Biden. It was on the New York Post. All right. The headlines about Hunter Biden, Twitter and Facebook and Google blocked it all and said, nope, didn't happen. So amazing.
Yeah, they definitely have a very, very large amount of power in terms of shaping the conversation, and it's important to see exactly how they use this. One of the things you mentioned right now that I'm perked my interest was that they share information with Google. I know the European Union passed a law that says that information can't be shared between companies unless these were authorized by the user. So I was interested in hearing from you. Do you think that they share between the different companies information as well, Facebook, Twitter, and Google as well, or do you think it's
100%?
Okay. And is it because of where they're based, because of their political leanings, or what exactly do you think would be the reasoning?
Yeah, I think these companies were all formed and given prominence, and way back when were actually started by the deep state to do what they're doing.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, again, you can call me a conspiracy theorist. I mean, I don't care. They're being used to collect information and track us. There is software on my cell phone that shows that I'm being tracked, that I can't get off my cell phone. So come on.
It's actually important that you mentioned this, because we saw activity from a social media site called TikTok, which is largely or entirely owned by Chinese enterprises such as Tencent. There was a couple of months ago even, an security update to Apple phones that showed when an application was sending information out. And with almost every keystroke on the application, information was being sent out to TikTok servers. And a lot of people interpret that as an indication that they were actually actively collecting data about the users and sending it back to the corporation. What exactly do you think is a threat there? And also, one of the most important things is that people have this response with surveillance from different social media companies, that they're saying like, okay, but what the hell does that matter? I'm just some guy that's in my house, liking my content that I like to see. Why does it matter if they control me or that? Should people be more concerned about this? And also, do you think it's being done by more than just these companies, maybe governments even as well, such as China?
Yeah, and again, you're right. I mean, I'm one guy. I was given advice back in the day when I worked for Hewlett Packard. I became friends with one of the top people in the company, and I thought I may have had some political aspirations at the time. This was 20 years ago. And he said to me, David, if you've got any political aspirations, do not get on Facebook or on social media. So I've never been on Facebook. I'm not on Twitter. I'm not on things. And so has that protected me? Who knows? Maybe not.
Right.
But the average guy, I'm sure it doesn't have any influence or effect. But if there is a problem with a person and they want to be able to get back to them, I understand that even through Alexa on Amazon, they can record conversations and go back and find things that are being done in your home. So it's just who knows.
And there's definitely a movement of people that have been deleting, especially I know the first Senate hearing with Mark Zuckerberg and about the privacy and the way that Facebook shares information and how they make money, where they're making their money from, where the information is going. I know that after that Senate hearing, there was a percentage of Facebook users that deleted their accounts, in an attempt to get away from this type of, the probable cause that they might be sharing their information. Do you think that's an effective way in terms of, getting away from it? You said that you're not really, you're not really participating in this, but for those of us that, kind of grew up on it, it's kind of hard not to be it on it if all your friends are on it. Is there a way for us to protect ourselves from a personal information standpoint?
No, I don't think that we can really protect ourselves. I mean, there are different, you can use you don't have to use Google for your search engine. You can use DuckDuckGo or one of the others and say, all right, but at the end of the day, I think if they want to find out things about you, we can't really protect ourselves. What are we?
Right.
I don't know. I mean, you and I aren't a threat to our government. And so we're just they're not interested in you and I, but it's just an interesting place of where kind of things are heading with all the social media and all the knowledge and the understanding. That's why I believe too, with the election, that they've got information that's not being reported yet. And it definitely won't be reported by the mainstream media if it's anti-Biden. Right. I think Trump has stuff that is clear to show that there's been fraud committed.
But above all, I think anything that everybody can agree with, I hope so, is that the discussion is way more important than anything else. Bringing these perspectives out, having people talk about them, not having these discussions in the shadow allows people to further investigate these and explain, or rather investigate the validity to these type of, claims that both Biden and Trump and people are making. So we're incredibly thankful for you coming on and sharing your worldview with us. I wanted to hand the floor to you one last time if there's something else you wanted to add.
No, this has been fun. I mean, I've only got a few friends that I can engage, that I really openly engage with on a regular basis. But there's other people, including my son. I can't talk about these things. He is not a Trump guy, and so it's interesting to say that, to be able to have this conversation, and I can tell just by the questions you're asking. You and Donald are really some intelligent people that really need to leverage what you're doing somehow, some way, network with people to get in South Africa needs you guys, needs people that are young, smart individuals like yourselves, and do what you're doing. And I just want to say that I tip my hat to you and say, wow, you both of you are two people that I think are very, very got bright futures.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that a lot. And we enjoy sharing the conversation, and we thank you for your worldview. So this has been Worldview. We've talked through Dnistran on a multitude of topics, and we thank you for listening so much.